my good friend Willie Muke Smith is here from Greenwich Village, from New York City, and we won't take up a lot of your time with us talking, but we do want to just say a couple of things to introduce what we're doing today, and we'll be very brief so that we can get right to it. Um, uh, we did our first in-person bearing witness retreat in Alabama year, last April, and we were in Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery. And our we have a good friend T. Marie King who lives in Birmingham and is a local educator, activist, scholar, community community person in Birmingham, and she had a lot to do with getting this film about Reverend Shuttlesworth made. And I'm going to let Muke say a little bit about Fred Shuttlesworth, um, so I won't go too much into that. But we have a nice connection to the production of this 56-minute film that they produced on Alabama Public Radio or Public Television. I'm sorry, just recently. It was just recently released. Um, I do want to mention, and I don't mean to take up time being promotional, but we'd love to have all of you participate this year. We're doing our in-person Bearing Witness retreat in Alabama again in May. Um, from I'm sorry, from in April, April 20th to 25th, and we will begin in Selma with 3 days in Selma, and then we'll move to Montgomery with 2 days in Montgomery. And we have wonderful and growing relationships with local people in both places, with the city of Selma, um, with national parks, who have a lot to do with taking care of some of these historical places, with Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery. We have a very close relationship. So our program will center around events and connections in Selma and in Montgomery. We'll be doing some service work, and so if please join us if you're at all inclined. So I'm going to stop and hand it to my friend Willie Muke Smith. And Muke, if you'd like to say a few words about Dr. Shuttlesworth, that'll be great.
Sure. Thank you. It's so nice that everyone has made the time to be with us today, and my bows to all of you from my side of the Village Zendo in New York City, and also to some of the folks who were on the Bearing Witness retreat. As Jeff mentioned, Team Marie, who we met in late April of last year, was telling us about Dr. Shuttlesworth, who was quite instrumental in, um, I would say, putting some heat under Dr. King in terms of getting involved in civil rights. Um, she spoke with a number of people, as you'll see in the documentary, but he was the forerunner. He was the forerunner. He experienced tremendous backlash, if not from the police, but also the government. And he was beaten, his home was bombed, but nothing stopped him from making sure that Birmingham was to begin to address the issue of Birmingham and the segregation in Birmingham. So quite an extraordinary man, and what's powerful about the documentary are still some of the folks that who are still around today, who their own witness about what had happened during that time is quite moving. And Team Marie will be joining us towards the end of our the production, and she'll be able to have a Q&A and just listen to whatever questions you have, and offer any feedback as to the documentary. So with that, let us begin.
Shuttlesworth was made possible by the generous support of Alabama Civil Rights Trail, Alabama Humanities Alliance, Alabama Power Foundation, the Comer Foundation, Medical Properties Trust, Mike and Gillian Goodrich Foundation, Robert R. Meyer Foundation, and Thank you to our production partners.
We said turn the Negro loose and America will be free. We're going to march. We're going to walk together. We're going to stand together. We're going to sing together. We're going to stay together. We're going to moan together. We're going to groan together. And after a while, we'll say, freedom, freedom, freedom now. And before we leave.
Fred Shuttlesworth was sort of the un-Martin Luther King. Not the anti-king, but the un-king.
I want to call him a warrior, someone who just really stepped up to the cause, whatever the cause may have been.
He truly risked his life to fight for change.
It wasn't just about segregation, but it was about segregation. Anywhere that he saw inequality, he confronted it.
He is up front. He is not sending people into battle. He is leading people into battle. It was what we need to get the job done.
His idea of fighting segregation was to fight segregation on all fronts.
He was totally unafraid of Bull Connor, the most violent, racist symbol in Alabama.
Birmingham was so tough, you just almost had to have an absolutist to deal with it.
We had to say to the public and to the world, we are against segregation with no compromise.
When I first met Fred, I thought, wow, this is one tough dude.
When he tried to enroll his children at Phillips High School, and he was badly beaten, his wife was stabbed in the leg.
Admitted to the hospital, back out fighting again. Home got bombed, back out fighting again.
Some folks said Fred was crazy. He had so much courage. They could take beatings. They took his car. They did everything to Fred. He never stopped.
We needed someone in Birmingham who wasn't afraid, and we found that man in Fred Shuttlesworth.
You got to walk for freedom. You got to talk for freedom. You got to sing for freedom. You got to think for freedom. You got to pray for freedom. You got to work together for freedom. You got to walk together, children, and don't get married.
Birmingham's initial claim to fame was that it was said to be the only locale in the universe where the three main ingredients of iron making existed in one place. It was just all about converting minerals into cash.
The city economy really takes off. A lot of people come here. The population grows very rapidly.
The profits were really based right away on this sort of two-class system of labor.
U.S. Steel saw the value of pitting black and white workers against each other, because if you kept black wages significantly lower, then the white wages would never have to rise.
It also saved the industrials from having to modernize their plants. So, they had these antiquated factories with black workers doing the worst, the lowliest of the low work.
50 cents an hour? Working with that steel like that? And the man that worked with him, if his wife, he may be getting 75 cents. It just kept a toll all the time. I got sick of it. That's right, you get sick of that. Segregation was so solidly in the minds and the psyche that nobody's supposed to tamper with it.
The rules are being made for Jim Crow by the force of the company having that kind of power. And that was consistent with white control.
And the laws were created to supply labor for the iron makers.
But the leading people in this city were segregationists. And all of the whites were together that the Negro should be kept in his place.
Bull Connor, who we know as the sort of, cartoon racist villain of the civil rights movement, was actually installed during the New Deal. as sort of an anti-union, anti-New Deal mascot. He had been a very popular baseball announcer for Dallas County and spoke in the country vernacular. And Bull became just wildly popular.
And so it was under Connor in particular, the police who stepped into this role of keeping blacks in their place and enforcing the law in such a way to intimidate blacks.
My father worked 2 jobs, and I remember him telling my mother they took the light bill money. And I thought, who took it? And it was revealed later it was the police.
It's sort of a police state supporting the industries. Bull Connor became the political intermediary between the corporate interests and the Klan, so that the corporations could be hands off and keep their hands clean.
Anytime that there was a little bit of movement toward accommodation for blacks, there was a tremendous amount of pushback.
And I was trying to get a job at a neighborhood store to deliver groceries to some of their customers. I was excited, happy. I'm 11 or 12 years old. I knocked on her door. She opened the door. She cussed me out and called me nigger. Don't ever come to her front door again. Go around to her back. And it was terrible. It's an experience I never forgotten. I was only 11, 12 years old.
Birmingham got its nickname of Bombingham starting in around 1947. There was almost no housing stock for upwardly mobile African Americans. So when the first African Americans start building houses even on the black zone side of the street, that was too close to the whites.
If a black person had made a deposit on a house on the wrong side of Center Street, you could expect that house to be burned or bombed or somehow or another vandalized.
A lot of these folks were upstanding AME bishop and, business folks. Every time they would win the right to live in their own house that they had bought, it would be dynamited.
Why isn't the sale and use of dynamite strictly restricted and supervised by officials? And if it is, then why is it so easy for certain elements and certain groups to obtain and use it?
Dynamite was used to blast coal from the coal mines. Asking how these guys know how to use dynamite or make a bomb is like asking a farmer how he knows how to drive a tractor. It's just in them.
At Arthur Shore's house, the scariest moment on the first bomb, after hearing such that horrific blast, there must have been 300 people down there in that intersection. The cop pulled his police car up in the middle of the intersection and pulled that shotgun out of there and blew that light out. The next blasts that he shot were over our heads, but we scattered because we thought we were getting ready to be killed. That was a terrifying moment for this entire Smithfield community. We knew then, no question, that the police were the enemy.
When we talk about most segregated city, it was like nothing is going to change. We're going to keep it just the way it is and maybe even make it a little tougher.
Now let me tell you something. You know as well as I. You hire a policeman that foots in that door. What they gonna come back next? Mayor, I want you to get you a nigger stenographer.
The next experiences were seeing the police cars out in front of our home and noticing those colorful Klan robes on the back shelf of the police car.
You wake up in the morning. The Lord gets you up in the morning, and it's always the same old thing over and over again. Parade. And right there in Smithfield, the Klan walk around paraded with the police cars leading the procession. Dr. King said the real tragedy that old Birmingham was not the bad folk in Birmingham, but the silence of the good people. That's why we had to struggle. 40%, we were 40% of Birmingham population. We was exactly
0% of the privileges. That's unfair any way you take it.
Fred Shuttlesworth was a child of hardscrabble industrial Birmingham. He had been born to young, unwed parents in a rural community outside of Montgomery.
He was, in some sense, acting like a father figure to the rest of his siblings, 8 of them.
His mother had married a much older man and moved to the outskirts of Birmingham. Shuttlesworth took his name with somewhat begrudgingly, William Shuttlesworth, because he was an abusive father and husband. He had worked in the ore mines, doing difficult labor that African Americans were assigned to, and he was on relief in the 30s, when Shuttlesworth was coming up, and at one point during a fight with Shuttlesworth's mother, he put her eye out with a broomstick. It was a fairly brutal household.
And when Alberta was busy somehow, she assigned Fred the role of being the enforcer, and he was the enforcer.
He was a very authoritative, if not authoritarian person.
But he said he felt like that he was being prepared for something greater, and as a child, he didn't know what that meant. He said that other people saw it too, though. He said that his teachers and folks at church, oftentimes they'd say, "Boy, I see something in you."
I think what happened, and the example of his mother, I think he learned his persistence from her, and his tendency never to give up.
He said he knew by the time he was 22, 23 years old that he would be a preacher. He thought he would be a doctor or a minister.
God got him ready for Collegeville after he pastored First Baptist Church in Selma. It was one of those situations where there was always contention between the pastor and the deacons. So he said, he had to really and truly fight hard.
When he came to Birmingham in 1952, he did a good bit of social ministry, or social gospel ministry for that matter.
People who were dealing with the environmental racism of the byproducts plants and the heavy metals and the air pollution that had penetrated in the soil. Fred was conversant with all of those kinds of issues. He was caring about those kinds of people.
They would work with city government to try to get streetlights in the black neighborhoods, because the black neighborhoods were just neglected, even though they pay taxes like everybody else.
His congregation had a handful of black middle class members, but most were in working class.
He said it was a movement of the masses and not the classes. Others thought that he was maybe too radical, but the people who lived in this neighborhood, people who lived in similar neighborhoods like this across Jefferson County, they supported him 100%, that they were working toward the future.
Fred was eager to get involved in the Birmingham chapter of NAACP. He got involved quickly trying to clean up saloons.
It seems that every weekend something happened at the juke joint, and what happened there invariably impacted the community. So he went to the police department and asked for help, and they just literally laughed him to scorn. And then because of the way he was treated by law enforcement, feeling that he had to more or less take matters into his own hand, things began to happen more and more in that same light as it relates to human and civil rights in this community.
He started the movement. He began to stand up over there in Collegeville at that Bethel Baptist Church, standing up against stuff by himself. So God had already seasoned him and got him ready.
But when he actually got involved beyond the juke joints, he actually talked to the congregation about it. They realized that if he was going to be successful, if this really was going to work, it was going to change things.
I couldn't hardly believe it, but I was so thrilled. We were going to get something going about gaining better quality for ourselves, okay?
because nobody was going to give it to us. There were many promises made, but they were never lived up to, okay?
There came a time when he started to think about, the differences between, the whites and the blacks in the community and the power structure. But what he understood even better than that was what it was going to take to bring about real change, and that was to become part of the process. And so he started challenging people to vote, to get registered to vote.
He knew God's will when he heard it, and he was certain that he was following it. When the Brown decision was handed down by the Supreme Court, he says the next day he saw the headline, and he said it felt like another conversion.
And then the Attorney General outlawed the NAACP in 1956.
I was a member of the NAACP, and it had been discussed and we believe that nobody can stop the church. The name came up of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights.
The state had a loophole, and the loophole more or less stated that religious organizations and literary organizations did not have to reveal who their members were.
We're gonna be legal, we're gonna negotiate, but we're gonna have direct action. We're gonna picket when necessary, we're gonna demonstrate when necessary. So that's the difference in HMHR and NAACP. And this is the way he led it. He had a strategy.
Kind of ironically, in a way, the failure of the elite in Birmingham to actually manage race relations in such a way as to kind of keep the black community engaged. All the moderates are sidelined, and it allows space for Fred Shuttlesworth to emerge.
The Supreme Court gave the Montgomery boycott a victory by saying that segregation of seating on buses in Montgomery was unconstitutional. And Shuttlesworth, of course, his thinking was, if segregated seating is unconstitutional in Montgomery, it must be unconstitutional in Birmingham, just 100 miles away.
During that time, we had to get up and give white folk a seat, even if we paid the money. Well, I ain't just talking about white women, I mean white men, anybody.
And Shuttlesworth decided that if Birmingham didn't voluntarily desegregate its buses, that he was going to ride on the front of the buses in protest.
Fred announced to the press that if they didn't do that by Christmas Day, my followers and I will board the buses and we will sit regardless of whether it's in the front or the back.
So then we let the press have it. And this is how Birmingham at that time, it is something to have lived here and to live through what I lived through. Reverend F.L. Shuttlesworth, 3191 North, 29th Avenue, has called a mass meeting. That's telling the Klan where to put the bomb, you know.
It was Christmas. We had Christmas dinner, of course, and we were happy. It's where you got things. I don't remember what I got.
Christmas Day, and I had gotten a red football outfit, and I thought I was one of Paul Brown's boys.
And I had thrown one of my shoes over towards the presents and was hopping on one foot towards the presents, which I must have been told stay away from them or what have you, and the bomb went off. And that's my memory of that night.
So I just felt a slight push, jar. I heard this terrific roar of dynamite. But the thing, I guess, that was on my mind was, it's what was more important than anything else. The fact that God was there.
According to the FBI, A bomb with 16 sticks of dynamite was placed up under the area of the house where the bedroom was. And the house is just blown up, totally just caved in.
The Klan had written my name on the dynamite, but God's grace erased my name to the extent that I didn't even get a scratch of no kind.
He didn't have any doubt about that. You know, people don't get saved from the middle of bombs unless God wants them to be saved for some purpose.
He said when that bomb went off, he started to quote the 27th number of Psalms. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? And so as a result, he said after that night, he was never afraid anymore.
I've always believed completely and totally that God will take care of you.
A teenage member of the church who had been baptized by Fred Shuttlesworth told me that if we had seen Jesus walk on water, we wouldn't have been any more reverent than we were when we saw Fred come out of that building alive. Fred Shuttlesworth was not only their man, but God's man.
But the bombing changed hearts and minds. After having gone through that the night before, he still got out and did it.
So the next morning, just as promised, since the bus company had not changed its seating policy, Fred did what he said. There were 22 arrests.
So in 1954, the Brown v. Board case, 1955, 1956, schools are still segregated in Alabama.
In 1957, Reverend Shuttlesworth and Dwight Armstrong and several others filed a lawsuit in federal court to desegregate the Birmingham public schools. The presiding judge, Judge Hobart Grooms, had a habit of just sitting on civil rights cases and not making a ruling. So Fred Shuttlesworth took the matter in his own hand.
Reverend Shuttlesworth, still based on Brown and what the Supreme Court, their decision, takes his two daughters, Pat and Ruby, and a young man from the church, and the goal is to integrate Phillips High School.
As they drive up, Shuttlesworth could tell that this was not going to be pretty, and he gets out of the car, and he's going to try to walk through this group of thugs.
He tells his family to stay inside, and he gets out.
When we pulled up, I thought to myself, Lord, have mercy. And they immediately attacked him. Lots of shouting and cursing.
Everything started with a B: baseball bats, brass knuckles, and bicycle chains.
And as he is being beaten, his wife Ruby gets out, and she's trying all she can to help him. Well, Ruby is stabbed in the hip.
Ricky Shuttlesworth has gotten out of the car to try to help, and then her mother ordering her to get back in the car, but she didn't do it fast enough because somebody slammed the door and caught her ankle in the door.
He's badly beaten. His arm is in a sling. The skin on his fingers has all been scraped off. I mean, it was just horrible what happened to him.
They get to the hospital, and after a while, they see the doctor. The doctor is treating his wounds. He comes in, and he tells them, I can't believe you don't even have a concussion. And Shuttlesworth says, with a smile, well, Doc, the Lord knew I lived in a hard town, so he gave me a hard head.
And then he will end up going to a meeting. And the crowd that night, they are furious. Everybody wants to come and just tear the city apart. But being the leader that he was, he calmed the crowd down. He said, which one of you got beaten today? Which one of you had to go to the hospital? Nobody could say anything. So he says that if I'm the only one who's beaten, and if I'm not angry, if I'm not trying to tear things apart, neither can you. And I just love what he said.
Shuttlesworth was litigating. He was filing suits on desegregation of parks, equal employment, schools. So he was leading in Birmingham courageously a movement.
Reverend Shuttlesworth was the contact person in Birmingham, and I think Alabama for the Freedom Riders. There were 2 buses of students, black and white, on the Greyhound bus, and they were also on a Continental Trailway bus. And the Greyhound bus is the one that was firebombed in Anniston. The other bus, the Trailways bus, had no idea of what had happened outside of Anniston, and they're still making their way to Birmingham.
Bull Connor, he said that they would have 15 minutes to do their work before the police showed up.
At Birmingham, there was another attack on the Freedom Riders. Their contact person in Birmingham was Shuttlesworth. And they all, like individually, found their way to Bethel Baptist Church out in Collegeville, get to a place where they would be protected.
The Klan managed to take most of the footage that was taken of the scene, except one local photographer had his camera smashed, but the film was still there when he went back to get it. Goes out internationally. One of the city fathers, who had been one of the arch segregationists in town, his name was Sidney Smyer, happened to be at an International Rotary Club meeting in Tokyo. It was the first time he had seen his city through the eyes of the civilized international community. And he had this change of heart. You know, he was the largest real estate developer in town, big in the Chamber of Commerce, so when he got back, he decided to form a committee to look into what they could do about Bull Connor.
They finally decided that from all of their meetings, they would come up with a document called a statement of the concerns of Birmingham black community. They asked me to write it up. I wrote that around 62, that we're talking about now. And they came back, and the message from the white business community, the group, was fine. They were willing to meet. Yes, they would meet.
They invite Shuttlesworth into one meeting, and he's really rather disgusted that it's taken so long for these proud white Birminghamians to, get involved and try to solve these problems.
A lot of people complained about it. I heard a lot of complaints from the committee members and so forth about Fred. The business community didn't want to meet with Fred. They tried to find ways to get around meeting with Fred.
Fred, being one of the founding members of SCLC in '57, he told Dr. King, look, Martin, I've got the people. You got the strategies, and you're talking all of this, but I've got the people together already in Birmingham.
They actually had the SCLC meeting in Birmingham in 1962.
Shuttlesworth is requesting, cajoling, insisting, pestering, come to Birmingham. We'll rock the country when we desegregate Birmingham.
Fred said, you need to come to Birmingham, and if we can defeat Bull Connor in Birmingham, we'll make a name for SCLC, we'll make a change in this country. And the fact that King agreed is, I think, a tribute to the fact that Fred was so persistent. And he was right. That's when they started planning Project C.
It meant confrontation, and it included the strategy for attacking segregation. So it included sit-ins, demonstrations, protests of all kind. That was the word that covered all of the activities related to the demonstrations at that time.
King needed a victory enough that he was willing to come to Birmingham. Wyatt Walker said nobody wanted to go to Birmingham. It was named Bombingham for a reason. And people got killed in Birmingham.
Shuttlesworth pretty much turned the planning over to Wyatt T. Walker, who was King's chief of staff. He really, did incredible fundraising, professionalized the whole operation.
So we've got King in Birmingham, we've got Abernathy, we've got SCLC, but this is Reverend Shuttlesworth's town. So therefore, nothing is going forward, nothing is going on that he is not a part of.
Birmingham was chosen for a place of conflict. It was chosen because of the personality of Bull Connor. And perhaps the personality of Fred Shuttlesworth as well. And so having those two strong personalities and then injecting Martin, you had all of the blueprint for major conflict for human rights.
Some went to J.J. Newberry, some went to Cresses, and the group I was with went to Lane Drug Store. They just pulled everything off of the table and remained seated, because the purpose was to get arrested.
I remember during the demonstrations, I'd wake up in the morning wondering whether I would end up dead somewhere or in jail at the end of the day. And it could well have happened.
I never slept so well, just on a hard bedding. I never slept so well, because we were going to be better the next day than we were today. You see, there was some hope.
The strategy is always to fill the jails until the jails would be overflowing to capacity.
People who participated in everything, no matter what Shuttlesworth did or said, they were always there. But they were looking for the community as a whole to kind of just swell all the big churches, just people by the thousands, but they really didn't come.
The sit-ins were not developing, dramatic confrontations, and so they upped the ante by switching to these marches.
The first big march, Shuttlesworth and another one of his lieutenants led it, and they're marching, and then Bull Connor says something like, "I'm hungry, time for lunch, bring on the wagons." The demonstrators just get to their knees immediately. They start praying. Shuttlesworth asks the Lord to bless the city, and then they take them to jail.
Shuttlesworth's motto when it came to this was he didn't believe in asking anybody to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. There was an injunction from Judge W.A. Jenkins. Martin did not like to violate court injunction. He didn't like to go to jail either. There's a big confab at the Gaston Motel.
We cannot, in all good conscience, obey such an injunction, which is an unjust, undemocratic, and unconstitutional misuse of the legal process.
Shuttlesworth had brought them some dungarees to put on and a denim shirt because, going to change clothes, we're going to start the demonstrations. And so when King walks out, almost immediately, he is arrested.
And a couple of days into his incarceration, King begins to write the famous letter from Birmingham jail.
And he is really responding to the ministers who are still saying, wait. But in his letter, King goes on and on and on about, you think that this is not an opportune time, but for black people who have been waiting over 100 years since the Civil War, it was past time.
The older people, they were afraid. So the meetings went down, and James Bevel, Fred Shuttlesworth, all together, and said, here's what happened if the children went out. And so I had a meeting with Martin. Martin says, oh, no.
James Bevel was a fairly new, younger member of the SCLC staff and was just sort of a wild and crazy man.
But Shuttlesworth had talked about training high school kids to become part of the protest a good bit earlier, before Bevel ever came to Birmingham.
But I said, nothing better young people can learn while they're this young than to be free and to fight for freedom. They'll understand it.
As a teacher, what I did was to try to get my students to understand that the American government said that all people should be equal. There were places in this country that they could go and be served without regard to race. Why not Birmingham?
Because of the failure on the part of the adults to show up in large numbers, it's like you look out and you use who you've got.
Let's start with students who are already in leadership capacities. And assuming that they had some influence, they could invite and influence other young people to become part of the march.
One of the speakers at the first mass meeting that I attended, he started asking questions. He asked about the football team. Do any of you boys play on the football team? Have you ever wondered why your helmets are always blue and white when you get them, but your school colors are green and gray? He said they come from Ramsey. When they get new equipment, you get their old equipment. And I thought, well, that's not fair.
And so as he began to point out the inequities, then it's at that point well, that's not right.
He said, if you want to do something about it, you can. Your parents can't, but you really don't have anything to lose because you're getting a second-class education.
When Reverend Shuttlesworth talked about dismantling segregation, and I said, okay, he's saying that things will be better if we're able to march and overcome the system that we have, things will be better in Birmingham.
We were told that you might be hit or called a name, but you can only kneel and pray or sing a freedom song. You cannot fight back.
I remember when King said, this is a nonviolent movement. If you cannot be nonviolent, we ask that you step aside right now. And none of us wanted to be the person who caused the movement to fail, who messed everything up.
But as children, we wanted desperately to participate in the movement. Elementary school kids like myself, we were begging our parents to allow us to go and march.
And then as they continued to plan this event for the Children's March, they called it D-Day.
Bevel also communicated with the local radio stations. Of course, they talked in code to the students that were listening.
We said, get your toothbrush, get your bag, because we were telling them that they may go to jail. We said we may have to spend the night, but we were talking about going to jail.
There's going to be a party in the park. We're going to jump and shout. We're going to turn it out.
At that time, any Negro knew that the park they talk about downtown on them park could go to was Lincoln Park.
The decision to march the children had been extremely controversial. They said if we have a dead child, the movement, it will never get over it. So Shuttlesworth is essentially the only elder, decision maker who is on board with marching the children.
But the children were the ones that had volunteered. Most of the adults were afraid to volunteer.
King is really wishy-washy about it. He can't make up his mind, and he is still in his silk pajamas trying to make up his mind when the kids hit the street.
D-Day was May the 2nd, 1963. It was a Thursday. And I remember waking up with my mind on freedom. And as I was leaving, my mother cautioned me, I'm sending you to school. Don't you go and get yourself in any trouble. I don't have money to get you out. And I said, yes, ma'am. That's what she needed to hear. And I actually was going to school. I just wasn't going to stay.
Shake, rattle, roll. Shake, rattle, as far as way as Fairfield, Bessemer, we're talking children walking all the way from wherever they may have been to downtown Birmingham, because now 16th Street has become the meeting place. They were sending them on a wild goose chase. So one group of kids may have walked out of one door, officers are trying to arrest them, and the main group, whose destination is downtown Birmingham, they hopefully will make it through as officers start chasing other children.
After the first day of the Children's March as D-Day, they realized that the police force is kind of overwhelmed.
So later on Friday, we were transported from the county jail to the state fairground.
The numbers just skyrocketed, and it was then they actually did fill the jails.
May 3rd is Double D Day, and kids go out to march again.
The surprise was Bull Connor being there with not only the policemen and the dogs, but the water hoses and the little army tank. And they sprayed us with those water hoses. They hurt. I remember thinking that no one said anything about water hoses.
Shuttlesworth and King and Abernathy get in a car, and they're cruising around. They see the kids, running around and everything, and he goes, "We almost got it, like one more day." He goes, "We got the town."
And since it was the merchants, owners of the department stores, whose businesses were taking it on the chin from the failure of whites to go downtown to buy their Easter dresses for their little girls, they began to negotiate with the Senior Citizens Committee that Sitzmeyer had put together in the latter part of 1962.
So the Justice Department decides to send down its Assistant Attorney General in charge of Civil Rights, Burke Marshall, to try to see if he can get things resolved.
But they generally kept Shuttlesworth away from the negotiations because they thought that Fred was likely to be too hot-headed.
I said, "Now, Martin, don't forget, we are not calling it off under any circumstances."
The Tuesday after D-Day and Double D-Day, while they're meeting, sirens are going on outside. They have the sheriff come and say, that the kids are all at the fairgrounds. It looks like a concentration camp. And what they're trying to do is to get these powerful businessmen to agree in principle to approving a deal with King to stop the demonstrations.
There were actually like 7 different components or things that Reverend Shuttlesworth wanted to see happen in Birmingham.
Desegregation of the lunch counters, of the bathrooms, fitting rooms, and the promotion of some African Americans to the floor out of the janitorial ghetto of the workforce.
Shuttlesworth was all over the place. He was in the streets a lot of the time when the demonstrations were going on, and that included when the fire hoses were being used.
Shuttlesworth realizes that the kids are out of control, so he goes back to the church in Kelly Green Park, and he starts sweeping around the park to gather them, get them back in the church.
He heard somebody say, "There's the Reverend, let's put some water on." It hit him with enough force in the midsection, bruised a rib. Connor learns that he was hurt and was taken from the scene in an ambulance.
"Oh, Mr. Connor, did you know?" He said, "Damn, I wish I'd been there to see it." He said, "What happened?" He said, "They took him away in an ambulance, took him to the hospital." He said, "I wish they took him away in a hearse. They'd been dead."
The merchants kept saying, "We don't want to make any decisions while protests are going on." So King decides to go along with that and calls a 24-hour moratorium on marches.
Well, there were 7 demands that Reverend Shuttlesworth said had to be made. And then of the 7, I think they initially agreed to 5. So when Shuttlesworth hears about the meeting and he is asked to come to the meeting, he is very upset.
Shuttlesworth comes in and he plops down in the chair.
And he says, "Why have you called me out of my sick bed?" King says, "Here it is, Fred. We've decided we have to call off the demonstrations." And Shuttlesworth says, "We who?"
Well, I had to say to them all, no, we're not gonna call it. I put some invectives there, some words. Hell no, we can't call it all. These people trust me, and we can't come into Birmingham and leave, and 4,000 kids go to jail.
You go into communities, you stir things up, and then when you leave behind lost jobs and destruction and a backlash, in the communities themselves. You're Mr. Big now, but if you leave Birmingham prematurely, you'll be Mr. SHIT.
Reverend Shuttlesworth said he used some words that were not Sunday school words. He did not want things to stop until they agreed to all 7. And then for King to just cave in, he felt at 5. He was very upset.
That was, I think, May 8th. It was a 24-hour moratorium. May 10th was the day that they sat at a table in the courtyard of Gaston Motel.
I think you can see, looking at his face, that this was not something he wanted.
The city of Birmingham has reached an accord with its conscience. Birmingham may well offer for 20th century America an example of progressive racial relations, and for all mankind the dawn of a new day, a promise for all men, a day of opportunity, and a new sense of freedom for all Americans.
Shuttlesworth delivered the first lines, and then he left because he was still extremely weak, and he basically fainted as he walked away.
I think what I felt was a sense of pride, and in my mind, I thought we had overcome.
We had a sense of entitlement that we could be considered to be citizens and human beings rather than property. And that gave the community here in Smithfield and in Birmingham at large, I think, a sense of oneness. It was a wonderful time. We thought that if we could overcome racial hatred in Birmingham, Alabama, if we can do it in Birmingham, we can do it anywhere in the world.
Of course, I learned a few months later that that was certainly not the case.
It was Youth Day. We were excited because Cynthia Wesley and I had a club meeting that would have started at 3 o'clock, and the Birmingham World had allowed us to put an article in the paper. I think everyone was excited, was looking forward to the day. I arrived at Sunday school at 9:30, and I received the envelopes for offering and the Sunday school books, and it was my job to just pass this stuff out. But I reached the top of the stairs. The phone in that room was ringing, and when I answered the phone, the caller on the other end said 3 minutes. And I take 15 steps into the sanctuary, and that's where I was holding the stuff I had collected, and the bomb exploded. Would be probably about 2:30 or 3 o'clock before I knew that my friends had not made it out of the bathroom. And I didn't know what to do with that.
Cynthia and I were friends. We weren't related, but Wesley was my maiden name. She did not demonstrate. In the spring, she was at school. And I felt like they got the wrong Wesley girl. I didn't express that, but that's how I felt. And I was devastated. I didn't talk about it to anybody. Part of it was just too painful to talk about. part of it was I was afraid. Suppose they come looking for the right one. It was a pretty tough time, I thought.
Monday morning, I was at school at 8 o'clock. There was no moment of silent prayer. There was no assembly. No one ever asked, "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about what happened? Do you miss your friends? Are you afraid?" It settled very well in my thoughts and my spirit that you could kill people in Birmingham and nothing happened. Black people didn't talk about it because they couldn't do anything about it. What were they going to say?
It's kind of popular to think that the bombing changed everything and the scales fell from our eyes and suddenly, Birmingham started behaving, but that's not what happened.
We had the bombing of the church, and I think out of sympathy, we passed those 1964 laws. But when people ask me, did the city change? What I think happened at that point, we just sort of stood still for a little bit.
I think adults felt that the cost was too high to get what we got. And people just weren't willing to sacrifice their children like that.
The work that Reverend Shuttlesworth did inspired many others to do the same.
Birmingham changed a lot in the way in which the country managed political issues of race.
The '64 Civil Rights Act, comes out of Birmingham. It's the most far-reaching civil rights act we've had. But it comes out of Birmingham.
His legacy is one of a servant leader, just asking the United States to live up to what the Supreme Court and what the Constitution and what the law says is possible for all citizens.
Shuttlesworth had the only functioning mass movement from the time of the Montgomery bus boycott on.
Even after the demonstrations in '63, Fred kept demonstrating. He never quit, particularly around police violence and police brutality issues.
Lots of historians have said that the Birmingham campaign saved the civil rights movement. It's the transition, it's the hinge.
You cannot kill what Fred did and what the movement did. Helped to pave the way for a lot of stuff.
Birmingham was the cradle, and that impact has been felt not just in Birmingham, but across the nation, even in other countries.
Invariably, his work would, of course, reach South Africa, China, Tiananmen Square. Even when the Berlin Wall fell, they're singing "We Shall Overcome." But he started right here in his neighborhood, trying to make a positive difference.
His legacy should allow the city of Birmingham citizens to really stand and poke our chests out. We have a national treasure, a national hero that made a difference, not just in Black Americans' lives, but America. He fought for change and he won.
What was the greatest catalyst in terms of a human being that transformed Birmingham from being the Johannesburg of the South to what it is today? And I tell you, it's Fred Shuttlesworth.
His legacy will live on because what he did changed the world.
This is Daddy's favorite song to sing with us, okay? You know it. Start it out, Pat.
I'm going to work until my day is done. I'm going to work till the setting of the sun. I'll cease from sorrow.
I appreciate everybody sticking with us through this film, and I sincerely hope we all learned something important and added to our understanding of the civil rights movement and issues that linger with us today. I'm not going to take up time talking. Our friend T. Marie King is here, and T. Marie, I don't know if you want to. Maybe if we can bring her up to the front, Hoden, somehow. Hi there, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And it wasn't lost on me that I saw you in one of those last frames in the film too. So.
One of the editors snuck that in. I didn't see it until it actually premiered, and I was like, "Why did they?" But I got a little cameo in my own project, so that was cool.
Well, we've got until the bottom of the hour if we want it, and T. Marie, we can if you'd like to just share with us, make a statement or something here at the beginning, and then perhaps we can open and take questions if you'd be willing to do that.
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much for screening the film, and I hope everybody enjoyed it and got something out of it. It was a 3-year-long project of trying to bring it to fruition. Our original hope was to get it out actually March 18th of last year, which would have been Reverend Shuttlesworth's 100th birthday. So that was our original goal, but I think it came out when it was supposed to come out, which really positioned us to have a lot of these good conversations. This year being the 60th anniversary of all those things that you saw in the film that took place in Birmingham.
That's great, thank you. We've got a nice group of folks here, and I cannot see everybody's hands. So down under reactions, there's electronic, there's raise hand, electronic. If anybody has a question or a comment or something for T. Marie, or just something you'd like to share, please, we can take a little bit of time here and share what we just experienced. Taigo from Oaxaca, hi, thank you. Let's see, there you are. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon. Thank you very much for this chance to be able to see the film. I was wondering, who do you contact? What plans are for going to Birmingham in April, and how is that going to work? Do you have any plans yet, and how will that be formulated? How do you join in on that?
Thanks for asking that, Roger. In fact, this year we won't be in Birmingham. We'll be in Selma for 3 days, and we'll be in Montgomery for 2 days. But I suspect already that among the group that we will likely have that will go, some folks will probably add on time in Birmingham. We tried to go to all 3 places last year, and we felt like we spent an inordinate amount of time on buses. So we're trying to simplify the logistics a little bit too. But we are hoping that our friend T. Marie will join us in one of those places, in Selma or in Montgomery in April. To answer your question, Roger, you can go to the Zen Peacemakers website, zenpeacemakers.org, and under the events, there is registration for this Bearing Witness retreat. And Chloe just put it into the chat. If anybody would like to click there and follow that, we'd love to have you come. So I hope that helps, Roger. Thank you. Grant, I can see your hand. Go ahead, from Key West.
T. Marie, great to see you.
You too.
And thanks for sharing that with us. I didn't get a chance to see it on PBS before, so I was looking forward to seeing it today. And wow, I remember you telling us that people just don't know how much Shuttlesworth has done, and then so quietly just goes off to Ohio when the job is done. Could you talk a little bit about how he came to make that decision? But after I express again my appreciation for you putting this great work together for us to have a greater understanding.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think a lot of his decision kind of rested, according to his children, on wanting to focus on his family. They had experienced along with him so much trauma from their house being bombed multiple times, witnessing him being hurt, their mother being stabbed, them getting hurt with the work that he was doing. So I think it was an opportunity to kind of shift and kind of focus on them more. But he wasn't necessarily quiet in Ohio either. So he got involved in a lot of the social justice movement in Ohio and ended up getting involved in housing. And so working around transitional housing and things of that nature. So it was very vocal there, but just kind of wasn't as hotbed as it was in Birmingham in the 50s and 60s, but he definitely continued the work. But then also traveled back to Birmingham and to Atlanta frequently, still being involved in NAACP and things like that. And especially once Birmingham started working on its Civil Rights Institute, he was one of the founding board members. So he was very vocal in kind of the direction that took as well.
Boy, he was quite the lion.
He was. and unlike some other leaders, had the opportunity to live a full life, so, and that was something that his daughter Carolyn said, I could complain about all the stuff we experienced, but we had our dad for a lot of years, unlike some of their peers who are also children of other leaders that we know.
Thanks for the question.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, Grant, and for your filling in, T. Marie. I appreciate it. Peter and Ara, I see you guys have your hand up. One or both of you?
Good. Men first. Tia Maria, you started us off when we were down there in April. You started us off on the right foot, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
You spoke about doing this film. It was hard, which I'm a filmmaker, and that's really hard. It was beautifully edited and paced. Congratulations technically. But it was hard to believe you were making a film in addition to all the activism you described yourself doing. And I particularly remember, I don't remember the examples, but you were very clever with how you were handling certain things. I admired you as a kind of interpersonal strategist. So just a simple question about the film. The film is a lot about strategy, different ways of handling things. And it's kind of a cliche and obvious that we're up against some of the same kind of things now. So I just wonder, having spent all that time in front of this material, if there are any obvious takeaways you have in terms of strategies that might apply to the political situation today.
Yeah, definitely. I think what stuck out to me is that I think one thing I'll say I don't see in my community personally or and probably some others is just the persistence of sticking to it, in the midst of things may not be moving as fast as we want to. I think we live in such a microwave society that we want things quick. We want it to happen now, and not understanding sometimes the work that takes that chance, the time for things to shift over. We focused on 53 through 63. So that's a big block of time of just constant organizing, building relationships with people, educating folks to get them to the space of where, all of those things could culminate in 63. I think what I learned from him is about having a plan, having the people to help you work the plan, but also being accountable, not only to the people, but also being accountable to the mission at hand. One of the things, I think it was Miss it's not in the film, but Miss Carolyn McKinstry talked about, and then I think his wife, Sapphira, she talked about, hey, no, you got to get registered to vote. Like, you can't be a part of this if your things aren't lined up like I need it to be. But making sure, hey, you don't have a way to get there, I'll come pick you up and I'm gonna take you down there and we're gonna make sure everything is in order. And I think sometimes we miss that piece of staying on people, holding people accountable, and then allowing them to hold us accountable as well as leaders. And I think he did that very well. I think if we kind of took time to kind of look at some of the strategies that they did employ, we could probably push some things a little faster in our communities today.
Wow. How do we share this film with others?
Yeah, so it's on pbs.org, which I love that it's on demand. So you please share the link with whoever. And APT, Alabama Public Television's education department, is actually working on a curriculum to go along with the film to send out to teachers. So we plan on probably around March sending out DVDs and curriculum to educators so that they can also use the film to teach their students.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Peter and Nora. Appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else have a question or a comment, or even just something that's coming up for you? And we've got two screens, so I won't be able to see you. Doreen, I see your hand. Yeah. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Doreen. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Very well. Thank you.
You can't. Okay. Okay, good. Because I don't see myself, so it's a little weird. But thank you so much, T. Marie. This is just a phenomenal film. And I remember coming into Birmingham last year, and there was all this information about him in the airport, and it was the first time that I started. I realized I didn't really know anything about him.
Yeah.
And so I did do a little bit of research, but then to see this film, it's just spectacular. Just spectacular. And, I think you were just talking about this is not really a question, but a comment, that you were just talking about that you don't see that his kind of persistence is just a rare thing, or maybe in our time it is. But seeing the film and having it be about him and his family, and as opposed to just this is what happened to people in Birmingham, but to have the families and the people who were working together, and their resilience is just, it's very, it's humbling, and it's also really inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We really wanted to take the opportunity, knowing that we had so many foot soldiers that are still here. We didn't want to miss that opportunity to get the stories from them firsthand,
Yes.
And I think it just, for us to have filmed and interviewed the way that we did, as we started stringing it together, it was almost like they all were telling, and they were telling the same story, but it's almost like it had the same cadence from person to person. And I think that was just what was so beautiful. And then being able to work with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute and use their oral histories of Reverend Shuttlesworth to have him also be a part of telling his story. I thought that was something that definitely needed to happen. I felt like he really needed to be a part of expressing his story, because you got folks who may have never heard him speak. And what was heartwarming to me when we did the premiere here in Birmingham, his family came down, his children, grandchildren, and a few great grands came down, and it was just so sweet. Kind of, they were watching the film, but I was watching them to make sure, you want the family to like what you did. You don't want to do something and everybody loves it but the family. But we were watching them, and it was just beautiful watching the grandchildren and great grands taking pictures of the screens, of seeing him as a younger man. So that definitely warmed our hearts to see that it really resonated with them, and they appreciated him being uplifted and the work that he did and the sacrifices they made as a family.
Yes. Well, and the other thing I just realized that I thought was so important is to have the history of,
Yeah.
what had really made Birmingham initially, and then how that, I mean, which we see all over, that uh, people in power really working to separate blacks and whites,
Yeah.
and trying to keep that, and that was done so concise. I mean, it's like you just got so much information in
Yeah.
there really clearly, and then you got to go, with main focus. But that was wonderful. That was
No,
really
thank
great.
you. Thank you. We really thought it was important to set the stage of what Birmingham was and what
Mhm.
led it to being the place that it became, that you would need a Fred Shuttlesworth. So we felt like it was
Yes.
necessary to tell that story as well. And we actually have, oh my gosh, so many hours, probably close, maybe overall, maybe close to 50, 60 hours of just interview information that we're actually looking at creating some more digital shorts that we will put online for people to know, because there's even more information about the industrial center of Birmingham, and
Mhm.
how all of that played into it becoming the Magic City, being known as the Pittsburgh of the South, and all of that. So we want to kind of do a more extended digital short around that, but we couldn't, it could have easily been a 4, 5, 6 hour film.
Right.
With, if we really just slowly and told the story, but we only had an hour or so to get it in there. But I'm glad that it it resonated with everybody and that it flowed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. We've got about 8 minutes left here. Bruce, I see your hand. Hi, how are you?
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Jeff, and I'll be in touch with you. But thank you, Willie and T. Marie. Just the sadness last week of the devastating tornadoes in Selma. Is that going to impact the plans for this spring with what you had planned as far as organization?
Bruce, so far we don't think so, but we have not. We're in touch with some of our contacts in Selma and Montgomery, and but we think we're still good to go for later in April. But we'll update that as we learn more. But thanks for asking.
Thank you. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Anyone else here? We've got a little bit of time.
May I ask, T. Marie, what can I do? What can I do now? What can be done now by anybody like me?
For me, I'm a big fan of education. I think, telling the story, educating people on, our history, how we got here, but also that, we all have a piece to play, a role to play. I think Miss Joanne Bland, who's in Selma, is a big cheerleader of asking people, what is your Selma? What is your thing that you can shift or change in your community? And I think it starts right there. Sometimes it's certain conversations we may need to have at home with our family and with our close friends. And sometimes it may be getting involved in other causes that mean something to you that you can, possibly help shift, change, or just lend resources. So that would be my advice. Absolutely.
Thank you, Roger. Kosan, Michael, I see you've got your hand up. Thank you. We're not able to hear you, Kosan. I don't see your mute sign on, but I can't hear you. I'm not sure why. Nope, still not. Still not. Maybe if you want to fiddle with that a little bit, and if there's another comment here first, we'll come back to you. Anyone else here while Kosan's working on his microphone? Chloe, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much both for coming. I was wondering, Muke, if you had any comments about the documentary?
Well, Jeff had asked me that question earlier. I'm very moved, very, very moved. Having been there in Birmingham and seeing sights and very moved. And I remember T. Marie, when we met, it was still in production, and
Yeah.
just to see. And I was thinking the other day, I think we might have, I know we've supported you in a lot of ways to make this happen. So it's just been nice, a wonderful experience for me to see this come to the place that it is. I feel, it's very moving. It's very, very moving. I feel something's happened, that it's just opened some things up and given a very broad picture about Dr. King and also Shuttlesworth's persistence, and I shared with you before, even his invectives, his Sunday school, not using Sunday school words, he was truly, truly, truly a prophet, and so it was very, very moving.
I'll say the coolest thing that I had experienced, and as we were working on it, my co-producer and I, we attended the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Rides. They did an event at historic Bethel Baptist Church, and they had 3 of the Freedom Riders there. And all of them said, the most courageous person they ever met in their lives, and, period, was Reverend Shuttlesworth. And they talked about how when they boarded their bus coming from, I think they were coming from Nashville, they said Diane Nash told them, if you get in any trouble when you get to Birmingham, get in touch with Fred Shuttlesworth. And he said, of course, as you know, history, they were stopped and, beaten. And they said they were able to somehow get to a phone and called Reverend Shuttlesworth, and he got them to safety and patched them up and fed them, and they were able to go on their way. But I would say the consistency we've heard over the 3 years from anybody we talked to was that was the most courageous man I ever met. And that was like the consistent word that people use was courageous. And that was not lost on me, that he had to be a giant of a man in his faith, as well as in his persistence for change, for so many people to feel that same way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Kosan, have you figured out your microphone yet? You want to try again?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, good. Yes, I just wanted to thank you, T. Marie. That was a very, very moving, very well done. Everything about it, you've sequenced it beautifully. The soundtrack, the way it's scored, very moving. So I am of the same age as the children that were killed in the church, and it just really, really affected how I now feel. So you've done a really remarkable job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Kosan, and I'm glad you got your microphone fixed. That's great. We've got just a minute if somebody has a really, really brief question or comment. I don't see any hands, so perhaps that's our signal that we've come to the end of our time. T. Marie, again, I really want to thank you. I can only imagine, particularly today, how busy you are. So thank you, thank you for giving us a little bit of your time.
Absolutely.
And I hope to see you in April. Lunch is on me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank y'all so much for being willing to watch it and have a discussion. And please share it with people you know. We wanted to get to as many people as possible. And as we said at the film, the work continues. So let's continue to do the work.